welcome to the Horror Track here at ConTinual. I'm your host, Gail Z Martin, and today we're talking about bad places, those locations that just bring out the worst in everybody as a setting for horror. And so before we dive into that spooky idea, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Gini.
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Daw Books, and I also write under a variety of pen names: Anita Ensall, Gemma Chase, G.J. Koch, J.C. Koch, and A.E. Stanton. And I write in every genre and every length. And of course, I definitely write horror and paranormal.
Great. David?
I'm David R. Slayton. I'm the author of the Adam Binder novels. The first one is White Trash Warlock, which came out last year. The second one, Trailer Park Trickster, comes out October 12th, 2021. And the third one, Deadbeat Druid, will be out next year. I write mostly fantasy, always with just a little bit of horror, a lot of creepy settings. So I'm excited to be here. And I write pretty much everything. I like to dabble a lot. So multi-genre, space operas, mysteries. But right now, it's all about urban fantasy.
Cool. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Brune, and in 2019, I started an indie horror micropress, Crone Girls Press, and we primarily publish horror anthologies. I'm also a writer, and surprise, surprise, I really enjoy writing the darker side of speculative fiction.
Cool. Matthew?
I'm Matthew Saunders. I write the Daughters of Shadow and Blood trilogy, which is the story of the Brides of Dracula. And also the Dreadful Penny series, which is an occult detective series set in my hometown of Greenville, South Carolina in the 1970s.
Nice. And I'm Gail Z Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, and some comedic horror, as well as other genres. And as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance that tends to go a little to the dark side. All right, so tonight we're talking about bad places, whether they were born bad or made bad. This is everything from, we've seen this trope come up so often, from the Overlook Hotel to Pet Cemetery and so many others. So let's talk about what's so appealing about the idea of a place that's just born bad. Ginny, I'm going to pick on you again. Don't worry.
Okay, no worries. No worries.
Everybody gets.
I know, right? I like the born bad places, and I like the made bad places, and I like it when they converge together. In book 13 of my Alien series, Camp Alien, I set a great deal of the action is set in an extremely haunted, horrible place just outside of DC. Where just terrible things have happened, like the ghost hunters went there and were like, oh my, and ran away, kind of thing. So that was really fun. It was fun to do. That was creepy. I call that that's my horror, story entry in the series. But I like doing it all the time in the Happy Acres Haunted Hotel for Active Seniors. It's set in a haunted nursing home that used to be a hospital, used to be a mental ward, that is extremely haunted, and the haunts either help or hinder. And that's very funny. And I also write creepy stuff. I love desert settings. I lived for 22 years in Phoenix, and I loved it. And the desert is definitely there are parts of it that are creepy, and the mountains in the desert are really creepy. My story in the Madness of Cthulhu, my story in Superstitions, my story when Josie comes home, they're all set in the deserts of some kind, and the terrible things that can happen to you there. I just see them as really awesome spots for terribly bad things to happen to really very stupid people. Not all my characters are stupid, but there are some. I just think that if you're really like, everybody says don't go there because you're going to die, and you go, I'm going to go there, you deserve what happens to you, and I'm going to make sure it's awful.
David, how about you?
Well, I'm from Guthrie, Oklahoma. So like Adam in my books, I grew up in a very rural, kind of creepy place. I'm sure Matt and I would be able to talk about stuff for a while in that regard. Adam was actually sort of came to me in North Carolina, so the Carolinas feature a little bit in the mythos there I'm working with. But I grew up in Guthrie, and outside of it in the woods, and Guthrie itself has a what is now a beautiful bed and breakfast wedding spot that used to be a Catholic school where a lot of bodies were found. It was a sanitarium. It's called Dominion House, which, there's a name for you. So I grew up with a lot of myths. I grew up with a lot of horror around me and setting. And now I live in Denver, Colorado. And the book actually, White Trash Warlock, goes from Guthrie to Denver. So I love to incorporate as much urban and rural myth as possible into the books. And I love digging into the dirty little history of every place I go. And I love being able to use bad places because I feel like there is something to be said about what an environment can soak up, right? We've all been in those spots somewhere. You mentioned the Overlook, which isn't too far from here, about an hour or so that way. But you go to those places and you're like, this place just feels wrong. And I think everybody's had those experiences where you just, this isn't someplace I should stay, or this place isn't someplace that has good energy, as it were. So no matter how much you kind of walk on that woo side of things, I love writing about bad places, and I love exploring our relationship to them because they usually come about because of humans. They're not wild or alien. They're something we created through our actions, I think.
Okay, Rachel?
So I was born and raised in New Jersey. And so when you talk about bad places, maybe not New Jersey, but we definitely have our fair share of urban legends, places where, kids would dare each other to go and older people would dare each other to go. One of those is the Devil's Tree, which is what, when I published my collection of short stories, that was the imprint that I chose to go with, is Devil's Tree Press, because it is this super spooky place in New Jersey that you can find. And there's all sorts of great stories about it. It was a portal to hell. It was used in various rituals, supposedly. If you go on weirdnewjersey.com, there's all kinds of great stories about all these spooky, creepy places. And like David was saying, some of these places were made, some of them were through the actions of others. One of my favorite things to do when I go someplace is to go on a ghost tour, or a vampire tour if you're in New Orleans, and just all of these places that are just random addresses, and then you walk by them and then it's something else. Yeah, to me, it's kind of fun. It's kind of creepy, but creepy fun is what horror fans are all about. So
that makes sense. And I'm right with you with the ghost and vampire tours. Matthew?
So I was born in Raven County, Georgia, which is way up in the corner of the state. It has the distinction of being where the movie Deliverance was filmed. And so, that area, the Appalachia area, the Appalachian Mountains, where I was born, like I said, and growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, you're still not that far. I still have family there. It's one of the oldest mountain ranges on the earth, and when you're there, you just have a sense of something ancient being there, something that was there before Europeans came, something that was there before the Native Americans even settled there. There are stories, when the European settlers came in talking to the Native Americans, hey, we saw something weird in the woods. What is that? And the Native Americans are like, we don't know what that is. It's really weird. We think so too, but we don't bother it, and you probably shouldn't either. So I grew up with stories about just places in the woods where you just didn't go because bad things would happen there if you went there. And so I think that's kind of where my interest in that came from, just growing up with those stories in that area. If you hear a sound in the middle of the night, you roll over and you go back to sleep. You don't look, and you certainly don't go investigate what it is because something not good will happen. But so that's kind of where I came from with that.
Yeah, I have to agree. I grew up in a rural area of Pennsylvania, and you always heard stories about places that, like you said, Matthew, even the Native Americans said, hey, that's bad. Don't go there. Just trust us on this. Don't go there. Now, most of the time the Europeans said, oh, that would be a great place to put a city. And tragedy ensues because we never listen. But in fact, there's a whole small island in the Allegheny River that legend has it that the original settlers said, bad stuff, guys, don't do anything there. They put a factory, what can I say? So yeah, the whole idea that there are places that the land itself, for whatever reason, is evil, just intrigues me as a plot device, as a legend. It certainly is something that has occurred to the hive mind of humanity over and over again across all different cultures and throughout all different times. And anytime you see something like that, to me, I look at it and go, okay, that's a keeper, because if people keep coming up with the same idea across all these cultures, something resonates. That's a good one to use. So when you're looking at some of these bad places, let's talk first about the ones that are just born bad. What kind of things have you seen or used yourself on places that it isn't because there was a massacre, it isn't because there was a huge accident, the place was just born bad? Where does that come from? How does that work? Or how have you seen it work? David?
I knew you were going to start with me. So growing up in the woods, we would get these stories, and part of what happened, so I grew up in a trailer, by the way, so we weren't anywhere. When I say in the woods, I mean away from the road. So I was on an acreage and a single wide trailer then. Sorry, I've been going home a lot, so I have mom's double wide on the brain. But single wide trailer in the scrub oak woods. And as a little kid and a small child, you think of these trees as massive. Of course, now I see them, it's like, they're not that tall, but it's creepy enough. And we had all of these myths around us about what not to do or where not to go. One of the things was that some of the dogs in the area, the neighborhood, had gone feral and eaten their owner after a stroke. And you could hear them howling at night, and that packs of them would run around the woods at night. Or that prowlers and people would come through the woods, which probably one of my favorite, or like one of the things I sort of use that imbues my stuff is taking that kind of energy and putting it in. The third book in my series, I really explore places that either were made bad or are bad. And I didn't know as much about the wider Oklahoma myths until I started writing, until I started researching, which was crazy. There are places that you have to ask yourself, did bad things happen there because the land itself was evil? Or did the evil acts sort of saturate, or is it a feeding kind of thing? I'm wearing a shirt from the D&D setting Ravenloft, which is gothic horror. And there's quite a lot of the books for it around me here in the office, because I really like the idea of the land itself having a personality. And what if that personality isn't very good? What if it has an ill will towards human settlement? I love what you said about the island. It's such an interesting idea. It's like, don't cross that river, don't take that step. I was lost in Germany with a friend. We were driving, and we got off the highway, and where we were in Rott, Germany, couldn't get back on the highway and trying to find the entrance. And we saw an arch under an old bridge. So it was like kind of an overpass, like maybe the on-ramp will be on the other side of that, so we could drive through the arch. And we just were kind of slowly approaching it, and we looked at each other and said, don't go in there. Just don't drive through that. It was one of those moments where both of us just looked at each other and said, no, we'll find another way. That might be the way to the highway, but don't do that. It's definitely a place where that spot, that setting felt like we just didn't belong, and to intrude would get us in a lot of trouble.
That's a great story. Rachel?
So a little bit of what David said is, when we look at stories that use places as characters, and one of the things that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, which is such a great story. And if the house itself was not such a strong character, that story I don't think would have been as effective. And it does pose these questions. Did the house become the way it was because of the people who built it, because of the person who is living there, because of the characters who are relating the story to us? Or was it something else? And if so, what was it? And I think we've kind of touched on some of the, some of these where you're driving down the street and you're like, nope, not going to go there. Some of us would still do that because we are always looking for the wrong sorts of adventures. I'm not one of them. I often, if I have those feelings, I turn around, and I also do not try to do things like that. But yeah, these are, I think what fascinates us is they touch on the concept of evil, which is maybe not something that outside of fiction we necessarily feel comfortable dealing with. We may see it, we may see evil in headlines or in things that happen, but I think that it's maybe not something we feel completely comfortable facing head on. And so these places that we can safely look at from a distance and say, oh, that's uncomfortable, oh, that's not where we belong, and we can follow the rules of what makes us maybe not as open to danger, if that makes sense. I think that's where fiction and writing and reading can help us encounter evil as imbued by a place that is a character.
Okay, Matthew.
So there's one place, there's a place in Romania called it's called the Bermuda Triangle of Romania, that I used in the Bride of Dracula trilogy. It's the Hoia Baciu, HOIA-BACIU forest, and it's near the city of Cluj in northern Transylvania. And it's just one of those places, like the trees grow in weird sort of misshapen ways, and no one understands why, because they're not diseased or anything like that. They just grow in weird shapes. And people report seeing ghosts. People report feeling sick when they go into the forest, on their stomach, or feeling faint, like they can't breathe. And that feeling goes away when they leave, or having missing time. People disappear, or, have missing time where they'll go in and come out a few hours later and think they've only been in for a few minutes, or even sometimes a few days later. Some people have reported that. In the middle, there's a big circle where nothing grows, like big circular clearing, nothing grows. It's like kind of like the Devil's Tramping Ground in North Carolina, but bigger. So once I found out about that place, I was like, well, we got to use that and in a book or something. So of course, with me it was, everything has to do with vampires. So that's why that's part of the reason that place is evil in a way. But that's no one's ever explained. Some people think it's a portal to another dimension, or there are aliens or whatever. So that was just an interesting place that I wanted to use in a book. And then, another thing I was thinking of is that, a lot of people don't even realize this, but in the Carolinas, towards the coast, there are pine forests that are very similar to the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, where the Jersey Devil, all those stories are. And just for whatever reason, whenever I drive through those areas, I find it kind of creepy driving through those areas, because you just have these just pine trees, it's the Pine Barren. It's basically the vegetation that grows there are these just massive pine trees, and you can just see columns of them going out forever. And that just for some reason has creeped me out. So I've used that in a couple of stories where, and again, it's the sense of there's something here that predates people, something here we don't understand that isn't necessarily friendly. And so that's a fun idea that I like to play with a lot of times.
Yeah, I've used, I'm really fascinated with the idea of hellgates and bad places, because there's just so much you can do with that. And it hasn't gotten as overused yet, at least, as some other aspects. So it feels like there's still some fresh ground to run around on. And I used the Hellgate in Brazil, Indiana, as the kickoff for the Witchbane series under my Morgan Bryce name. Two brothers go out and they're celebrating having one of them come back from the army. They're just gonna sit up all night, drink some beer, make a joking video to freak their friends. And it's basically, hey, it's an excuse to sit up all night and drink beer. Only obviously it goes very, very bad. And the rest of the series is the surviving brother trying to get vengeance. So never sit up all night near a Hellgate. But in Brazil, Indiana, I mean, you can't even find it on a map practically. Why would you put a Hellgate there? Probably because there aren't a lot of people around. You can come and go as you please. I've also really liked playing with the idea of genius loci, the elemental spirits of a place being good, bad, or neutral. And when they're good, they're helpful. When they're neutral, you don't even know they're there. When they're bad, as the saying goes, they're very, very bad. And so that has been fun to play with because it's a big bad that isn't one everybody has seen before. And so you can put your own stamp on a lot of what you're doing because you're not going, Matthew, we've both written about vampires and you inevitably get the person who writes a review that says, vampires don't act like that. Where when you're using something that's a little less well known, you can make up some of the rules and not be gainsaid quite so quickly. So what about the places that are made bad? What are some of your favorites that you've written about or read about? And how do you make a place evil? Rachel?
So one of the stories that I published in the Stories We Tell After Midnight anthology by Laura Price called Primary Manifestations. It's a little bit of all of those things that you explained in that, and not to give away too many spoilers, but the place starts with what looks like a malevolent haunting. And the story takes us through the points of view of a mother and her daughters, and basically kind of not explains, but shows, doesn't tell what's going on there. And to me, that was a really interesting way to approach maybe that traditional haunted house trope. I really enjoyed the book Hex, and the author's name is completely escaping me at the moment.
Thomas Oldhuvent.
Yes, great.
He's a friend
book.
of mine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
he's an awesome person. Yeah.
You can tell that I just totally fangirled over his book. But I really enjoyed that book because it looked at how a collective action made something about this place a trap, a prison. So that was a really interesting way, I thought, to approach it. If you look at a lot of literature, one of the things that I really do enjoy is looking at how collective actions, when you have a community that is either cowardly or has made a bad decision and that affects generations in this place. And that's the book Hex kind of really explored that in a very, very creepy way, and I really enjoyed it.
Matthew?
So I was thinking, this is another one that I used in the Dreadful Penny, but there's a creepypasta, which is the little internet snippets of things that kind of get passed around like they're real, but they're the internet evolution of urban legends, basically. And there's one about as a town in Kentucky that a tragedy happened there, and a a lot of people wound up dying because of it. And so the ghosts sort of kind of eventually outnumbered the people who lived there. And so the local authorities came through and totally, bulldozed over the road that leads to this town. They completely blocked it off and everything else. And they erased all records of this town ever even existing, because they didn't want, anyone to try to even go there. Because everyone who found this town or went there, had, bad things happen. The little creepypasta bits are people who have found this town and gone there, and the horrible things they've seen or have happened to them. And so I like that idea, and I use that in one of the stories about, I transported it from Kentucky to South Carolina, but that the whole idea of and it goes back to the sort of touches on the same theme of collective, this community has done something, bad in a way that has affected the town as a whole and caused it to be the way it is. So that was fun to write.
Okay, David?
I really like working with places where I feel like there's an environmental factor. Centralia, Pennsylvania, the inspiration for the game Silent Hill, places where humans overstepped, and whether that's morally or we mined too deep into Moria, right? That kind of thing. So I love settings where humans have basically gone in and messed it up, and that's unleashed the bad or the horror. There's a really interesting unsolved murder in Oklahoma at a place called Dead Women's Crossing. And it's one of those true crime things that happened so far back. We have no idea, and we'll probably never solve it. I got to use it in book 3, which is kind of a road trip through the underworld, which was really fun to write. And each stop along the way, I tried to incorporate something along those lines, either something kind of tying into either climate fiction or what can make a place evil. Is that evil sentient? Is it nature or nurture, right? So if I feed you a lot of murders, will you become an evil hotel? On the other hand, if I feed you a lot of happy weddings, will you become a happy hotel? So I really like playing with that idea that a made place soaks up whatever you give it. We are what we eat, and maybe these sinkholes or these environmental states are the same.
Okay, Ginny?
Okay, and I apologize if I freeze. We're having thunderstorms and my connectivity is not wanting to cooperate. But I'm kind of glad I didn't have to answer the what did you have naturally? I grew up in a Southern California beach town. There were no scary places. Everything that was scary was a person. If it was a place, it was because the people that were there. So while I can look at most of anything that I do in like a setting that's evil, like the desert, it's evil because of people, or it's evil because Cthulhu and his relatives are there. But I think anytime the word asylum was ever in your location's name, it's horrible, because what humans will do helps people, helpless animals, helpless children, is horrific. It's worse than anything any monster can do to us. And every asylum has these horror stories. Plus, if you've got especially from a couple hundred years ago, the medicine was horrific. I mean, we make advances every year in medicine, and, in the 1800s, 1700s, medicine was horrifying. We're just going to leech you and chop your arm off and maybe you'll survive. And what do you mean anesthetic? That's a scary word, right? So to me, those places, the horror, the pain, the fear, the viciousness, that's what seeps in, and it stays because it's got so much power, and it takes a lot of the bright light, the white light, the love, the good people. It takes a lot to overcome that. So, and I don't even know if some of those places it's possible. I don't think you can ex-demon. I don't think you can cleanse. There are some places that cannot be cleansed. And those are, I think, very cool to write about, because you're never, the best you can hope for is you're getting your people or some of your people out alive. So.
David, I had to laugh when you mentioned Centralia. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and of course, Centralia is one of those stories that everybody talks about, and it's not a myth. It's a town that had a coal fire begin, and they don't know when the coal fire is ever going to stop. They evacuated the town in, I think, the early 60s, and it's still burning. And there are a few diehards that still are living there, but they've tried very hard to keep tourists away, because there are places in the ground that are hot, dangerously hot, and there are fumes, and it's an underground coal mine on fire, and a very rich one, so it could burn for hundreds of years. But I used it in a novella, Burn, and there are actually some oblique references to Silent Hill in there for anybody who's familiar with the game. So that was fun. I think one of my favorite real world evil places made by humans is the old jail in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, the jail looks like a castle. It has been everything from a jail to a place to house prisoners of war during the Civil War. And they did the hangings out back in what's now the parking lot, and they buried people in the potter's field across the street. And since it stopped being that, and it was that for about 100 years, they've been trying to do new things with the property. So they used it as a satellite campus for an arts college. That lasted for a little bit. The latest thing is it's been sold for condos. Now, they're not talking about raising it. They're talking about remodeling it. And here you can have the Lavinia Fisher suite, who of course was the famous mistress of a roadhouse, who she and her husband killed all the patrons and stole their money, and who was hanged there. And in the what could possibly go wrong side of this, across the street on that potter's field, they've built low-income housing. Who thought this was a good idea?
Grade
Not
school.
great.
I went to a grade school built as a Catholic grade school built on a Native American cemetery. So yeah,
Anybody's
nothing creepy happened.
back up?
No, it was interesting. I didn't know about that until I was an adult, and it was horrifying. And I don't think they've done anything. It's just like, yes, that's where our church is. But yeah, no, I would not want to live in that condo.
No, I know in New Orleans you can charge a premium for haunted apartments, but that's just a bridge too far.
We have a whole park here. Our botanical gardens, and the parks next to it, or bridging it, around it, are built on was a cemetery. And Cheeseman Park used to literally be a graveyard, and before that, it was an Arapaho Indian burial ground. And then there was this massive fire because people were squatting in the park, and they were living in the cemetery, they were living in the crypts. There were casinos and saloons and things, and it burned that whole area of Denver to the ground. In the very early 1900s. So the city hired some shady contractors to move out the bodies. So they just shoveled everybody into wagons and moved them out to other cemeteries. But because they were shady, they left all these bodies behind. They left all these grave markers behind. So every time the Botanic Gardens does any new ground-breaking thing, like they expanded their parking garage, they find more bodies. So Denver, like the heart of Denver, has this massive creepy thing to it. It really gives the city some of its flavor.
Well, I think that's a lot more common than we want to think, because even when, they never expected the original settlement to become as big as the city grew into. Mm-hmm. And now you have these churches downtown that have dead people taking up what is now valuable land. Mm-hmm. And so they, like you said, relocate the graves. Most of the time they just move the tombstones because it's too expensive to move the bodies, and it's been long enough, nobody who's a direct relative is paying any attention. So there are a lot of places where there are dead people under our feet. And even more so, you go out into rural areas and the church is long ago burned down or the farmhouse is long gone, but there's this little plot out there underneath a big tree where there are a few people buried and maybe the headstones are mostly gone. There are so many places like that where, you know, the dead kind of have a right to be pissed off at us for forgetting them and leaving them there. I think one of the other places where I could really feel some of that energy was we went to Gettysburg battlefield. And if you've been at Bloody Angle, which was one of the worst parts of that battle and so much carnage, although I love writing about this stuff, I don't think I have a psychically sensitive bone in my body. I was creeped out. And other people I was with who have much more sensitivity on those things than I do said, let's just leave. Let's just leave. I don't want to be here. So it's definitely something that you can feel when you're in a place. What, as we're kind of coming into the last lap here, is there some place that you've heard stories about that you haven't had a chance to use that you'd really like to? Jenny?
Okay, well, not so much heard stories about, but have actually stayed at. Arizona has a lot of haunted hotels. The Hotel Gadsden is the most haunted place I've ever been. I never want to go back. It was a terrifying, something almost killed me night. And I've stayed at haunted hotels all through Arizona. I'm actually working on a ghost hunters series that will take them to each one of these places. And I don't, if I'm alone is when they get to me. If I'm with somebody, apparently everyone else I travel with is a skeptic or is enough that they block me. But if I'm there by myself, oh goody, right? Guess who gets a visit some horrible kind, right? So I don't really want to go to any more of them. I'm good. But I definitely want to write more about the haunted hotels of Arizona because I don't think they don't get the same press as some of the other haunted places. And some of them are, the Hotel Gadsden is terrifyingly haunted in like all but one level. There's just, it's not just one thing. It is a cornucopia of haunts there. So if you actually really want to go someplace massively haunted, Hotel Gadsden in Douglas, Arizona, it's right by on the Mexican border. And enjoy.
Matthew?
Oh geez. You know, there are so many places, you know, in the Appalachians that have, you know, weird stories about them. You know, it's hard to pick one. You know, just the you know, you're talking about ghosts or things, just the cryptids that, you know, the cats and the other things that are, you know, in the forest that might get you. You know, just thinking about all those things. I mean, you know, for some reason, I'm never going to go camping because I guess the woods are just creep me out just in general, because that's typically the bad places I write about. I don't write so much about houses or things like that. It's just always something in the woods. But you know, I don't know. It's an interesting question because, like I said, I like the whole idea of places that maybe where things are that predate people, and just any of those places that you know that I want to try to explore, like whether it's, you know, the top of a mountain or the in the middle of the ocean, or the desert. You know, there are a lot of places like that kind of speak to me as far as places I want to try to write about. So, you know, we'll see.
Cool. Rachel?
So one of the things that has been on my list because, of course, as writers, we have lists that are quite long of all the ideas we'd like to get around to. Um, there are a number of military posts, bases, etc., that all have their own ghost stories. And I've wanted to explore some of those. For instance, the old detention barracks at Fort Leavenworth were repurposed into classroom space. And so, of course, when we went, we got, we looked up all the ghost stories and all the sightings and things like that. And I thought that was really, really cool. I am a complete, I don't get haunted by anything, knock on wood. So nothing appeared to me personally, but it always was very fascinating to me that these stories, some of them are recent history, some of them are, a couple, 100 or so years ago, if you go back to the Revolutionary War. One of the places that really gets to me, and I had a chance to visit it a month or so ago, is Pearl Harbor. And all of the things that happened. And so those would be some of the settings I'd really like to explore. Not quite sure how, whether it would be a short story or a series of short stories, but I think that would be pretty fascinating.
Cool. David?
And I could spend a whole hour just listing these off. I would love to go to Hart Island in New York, which is was where they sent out sick people for quarantine. Essentially, it's still a Potter's Field island, so there's graves there. There are buildings and ruins, kind of a bird sanctuary. I had to look it up because I can never pronounce it correctly. But the island of Pavaglia, near Venice, the haunted Italian island. Very similar story to Hart Island. It's privately owned. But the place that's kind of number one on my list that I'd love to visit it's a gate to the underworld in a temple in Turkey that is dedicated to Hades. And the reason is because they would bring in animals and the animals would die, but the priests would be able to walk right out. And they've figured out that it's because carbon monoxide pools at a low level there. So a person can spend more time before they'll succumb to the fumes. But they thought it was a very sacred kind of thing because they could bring in animals and the animals would expire, but then the priests, protected by the god, could leave. And I love those kind of liminal spaces, those spaces that, is it science? Is it something else? And I've been to places, I'm a high school dropout. I grew up really poor, so I try to travel as much as I can. Like Delphi in Greece is got a very quiet, sacred vibe to it. And there was a murmation of birds and a cone flying overhead the whole time we were there. And it just really added to that energy of, this is a special place. And then the last one is, I told you I could go on, I'll stop. The last one is I want to go to Myrtle Beach that you write about because of you, I want to explore Myrtle Beach and go to all the cool things that you write about there.
I think I have dramatically upped Myrtle Beach's murder numbers since I started series, just in terms of giving them credit for a lot of dead bodies. The one that I keep coming back to, or I've touched on in several books, is Nowheresville in the middle of Pennsylvania, but it's South Fork, Pennsylvania, which most people haven't heard of. My mother grew up there. But if it's famous for anything, it's for the South Fork Rod and Gun Club that was located just outside South Fork, which was for the robber barons of the 1800s Pittsburgh. And it's the earthen dam that failed that caused the Johnstown flood that killed 1,500 people, for whom no one was ever held accountable, even though the groundskeeper and the engineers repeatedly warned the wealthy owners of the gun club that the dam was not properly made or maintained, and it was at some point going to give out. And so 1,500 people died. The gas lines were swept away, and so all the things on the surface, trash and bodies, caught fire in the middle of the flood, and it just roared down the valley. And it's a horrendous episode in Pennsylvania history. And that to me makes it and there are coal mines all through that area, which of course nothing good ever happens in a coal mine. And so with my personal connection to the area and just that horrific history, I keep finding myself writing it into several books now. And there you go. Well, folks, we have blown through our time. We're at the end of the hour. And so I want to go around again, have everybody say where people can find you online. And if you have a book that is new or coming up or on pre-order or just one you want to hawk, let us know where to find you and what to read. And I'm going to start with Rachel.
So if you are interested in horror anthologies, then crowngirlspress.com is the place to go because we have them. I also recently indie published a collection of short fiction, horror and dark fiction called Side Roads, and that is available on Amazon.com and also in Kindle Unlimited. And that is where you can find me. Also, Twitter, Rachel A. Brune, that's me. I mostly tweet about my dogs and kids. So.
Cool. David?
So White Trash Warlock came out last year. You can find it anywhere in print, audio, or ebook from Blackstone Publishing. And you can find Trailer Park Trickster, which I'm just in love with the cover they did for book 2, out October 12th. And you can see my website address there on my name, davidslayton.com. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm kind of all over social media, and I love to connect with readers and writers and anyone with interest in the creepy. So if you go to my website, you'll get all my handles and links to find me all over the web.
Cool. Ginny?
www.ginnykoch.com, and I'm on Facebook. I have 2 different fan pages, author Ginny Koch and Hairspray and Rock and Roll. I'm on Twitter, no space, and I'm on Pinterest. And I'm on particularly Facebook way more than I probably should be. So I'm very easily found. And like David, I really like interacting with readers.
Matthew?
My website is jmsaunders.com. If you scroll down to the bottom, that's where all my social media links are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, even. You can find me on all those places. My books, again, Daughters of Shadow and Blood, which is the trilogy about the Rise of Dracula, and Dreadful Penny, which is the occult detective series. Those are both on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold, as they say. So you can find me in those places.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. All my social media sites or pages are some variation of those names. So as long as you remember the Z and spell Bryce right, you're going to find me. And of course, you can mostly find me here on ConTinual. Well, folks, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was a great conversation. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more horror coming up soon on ConTinual. So we'll see you online.